Hello everyone, welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Apologies for the delayed start. Unfortunately, we were facing a major technical issue and as a result, the session has been delayed by almost 35 minutes. So let me tell you today, unfortunately, the pen with which we write is not working, but yet we shall not cancel the session. Let's go ahead and discuss and analyze the newspaper. So please keep in mind, I won't be able to write as much as we always used to do. We promise we'll fix the issue and by tomorrow it should be sorted. But today, let's discuss and analyze the paper. Now, before we start, can you please let me know in the comments if I'm clearly audible and visible? Please let me know in the comments if the video and audio is fine. Clear? Okay. So let's begin with today's discussion. First, we will look at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. See, I always tell the students that Sunday newspaper should not be neglected because Sundays you get a number of interesting articles, especially from science and technology and from other areas which are usually not covered in the weekday newspapers. So today we have 9 important articles. So let's discuss them one by one and ensure that we comprehensively cover the newspaper so that you don't have to go back and read the paper again. So before we start, I have a very important announcement. On 23rd March, that is the next Sunday, Unacademy will be conducting the Civil Services Championship Test. This is an opportunity for you to attempt full-length mock papers of GS Paper 1 and CSAT. And you stand to win attractive scholarships and rewards. Those who perform well can even win up to 100% scholarship on our IAS courses along with attractive rewards including IPL box tickets and iPad and tablets and smartwatches. So those who are interested, please click on the link provided in the description box of this video. Now, those who want the PDF of this session, you can join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF on the Telegram channel. So let's get started with the first topic. On page number 12, we have this important article related to tiger reserves and tiger conservation in India. The topic is in news because recently the government of India has notified the establishment of a brand new tiger reserve in the country. Which is this tiger reserve? It is the Madhav Tiger Reserve in the state of Madhya Pradesh. See, Madhya Pradesh is very, very important when it comes to tiger conservation in the country. Madhya Pradesh has the highest number of recorded tigers in India as per the latest All India Tiger Census. Every 4 years, under the leadership of NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, India conducts an All India Tiger Census. So the last data was brought out in 2023 when we marked the 50th anniversary of Project Tiger. And according to the latest census data, Madhya Pradesh has the highest number of tigers in India. See, according to the census, India has a total of 3,682 tigers. We have seen a significant jump in the tiger population in the last 2 decades. Ever since Project Tiger was revamped in 2005 by the then Manmohan Singh government. Since the last 20 years, India has almost tripled its tiger population and today the total tiger population in India is 3,682 tigers. India has the highest tiger population in the world. So obviously, conserving this endangered species is of critical importance. And since India is the flag bearer for the tigers, it is very essential for India to ensure that the tiger habitats are conserved and well preserved and protected. And Madhya Pradesh has the highest number of these tigers, almost 700 plus. Until recently, it was Karnataka which used to have the highest number of tigers, but Madhya Pradesh has overtaken and Madhya Pradesh is right at the top. And also please note down another important fact for your prelims. Madhya Pradesh now has the highest number of tiger reserves in the country. It has a total of 9 tiger reserves, including the popular Pench, Kuno National Park, etc. The Madhav National Park, which has now been designated as the latest tiger reserve, makes it the 9th tiger reserve in Madhya Pradesh. Thus, Madhya Pradesh is at the top with regard to the total number of tiger reserves in the country. So, with the designation of the Madhav Tiger Reserve, India now has 58 tiger reserves in the country. And you can see the distribution of these tiger reserves in the map which has been shared over here on your screen. After Madhya Pradesh, it is Maharashtra, which is at the second position with regard to the number of tiger reserves. It has 6 tiger reserves, followed by Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, which have 5 tiger reserves each. So please remember these basic facts which I have discussed, which can be very important for a prelims factual question. Now let's understand what are tiger reserves. How did India focus on tiger conservation? And why did we see a big decline in our tiger population a few decades ago? And how did we revive the tiger population from extremely low numbers? So we have to study Project Tiger, understand the success of Project Tiger. We need to know what are tiger reserves, how are they designated? What is the role of NTCA, National Tiger Conservation Authority? How does designation of a tiger reserve help in conservation efforts? And we'll also discuss what the importance of the Madhav Tiger Reserve in particular. So let's begin with the tiger population in our country at the start of the 20th century. At the turn of the 20th century in early 1900s, it has been roughly estimated that India might have had around 40,000 plus tigers in the wild. A massive number, of course. But due to consistent hunting, poaching, reduction of habitat, we saw an exponential decline in the tiger population in the country. During the colonial era, since medieval times in fact, the princely states in particular would encourage the hunting of tigers. The British would encourage these so-called shikari expeditions where they would encourage the hunting and killing of tigers. So as we moved towards India's independence, by 1947, our tiger population had seen a drastic decline. And especially by 1970, the tiger population had dropped to just 1,800. So hardly in 7 decades, we had destroyed almost 85% of our tiger population. Because after independence, easy gun licenses were also issued. And as the proliferation of arms happened in the country, it enabled hunters and poachers and the illegal wildlife traffickers, which led to the killing of tigers for its precious parts. So in 1969, the Indian Board for Wildlife, which is the predecessor of the National Board for Wildlife, it came out with a very important recommendation and it placed a ban on the export of cat skin, because tigers were hunted not just for the teeth, the nails, but especially for the skin of the tiger, which has a lot of value in the black markets, in the wildlife trafficking black markets. So the Indian Board for Wildlife placed a prohibition on the export of tiger skin and all cat skins in order to curb the killing of tigers. The then Indira Gandhi government in 1971 took stock of the situation, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi personally took interest in the topic of tiger conservation and established a task force to come out with a set of recommendations regarding how we can preserve and conserve our tiger population. So based on the recommendations of this task force, finally the Government of India launched Project Tiger in the year 1973. So under Project Tiger, dedicated habitats were recognized and adequate protection was given. Legal and as well as physical protection was implemented by the central government in coordination with the state forest departments. So under Project Tiger, we started establishing these protected areas, which we call as tiger reserves. For some years, Project Tiger did deliver results. We managed to protect some of the tiger reserves and the habitat around it. We saw a slight increase in the tiger population. But eventually, the project was facing many hurdles and challenges. The lack of funding and the lack of focus on implementing the conservation plans, the lack of coordination between center and states, and the persistent issues of growing population, deforestation, the destruction of the habitat and the prey base, it kept on affecting the tiger population in the country. So Project Tiger did not really achieve its intended results. By 2005, our tiger population had declined to 1,400. When Project Tiger was launched, our tiger population was at around 1,800. Ideally, the tiger population should have increased because of a dedicated conservation program. But the opposite had happened. Even after years after implementing Project Tiger and establishing tiger reserves in the country, the project was a failure as tiger population had declined to an alarming 1,400. So the then Manmohan Singh government took stock of the situation and completely revamped Project Tiger and established a new statutory body to lead and implement Project Tiger. This is how NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, was established in 2005, which started functioning from 2006. It also has legal backing through the Wildlife Protection Act. So the NTCA now has overall responsibility for managing the tiger reserves in the country in coordination with the state governments. So state governments can raise a request to designate a protected area such as a national park as a tiger reserve. If a habitat such as a national park or a wildlife sanctuary has a decent population of tigers, even if it's hardly 2 or 3 tigers, which is a viable population, state governments can submit the proposal to the Environment Ministry, the NTCA, and following approvals from the center, the state government will notify the establishment of a new tiger reserve. Now, the reason why the creation of tiger reserves is important is because once the tiger reserve status is given to the protected habitat, special conservation plans are implemented. Special funding is provided, which is very essential to mobilize the resources that are needed to protect and conserve the tiger population. So once a tiger reserve is designated, the center and the states will work together with NTCA to design a customized conservation plan. Tiger conservation plans are drafted, and it's a very holistic approach which is taken. It's not just about protecting the population of the tigers, but it also looks at all the other factors, the environmental factors, and looks at the overall ecosystem and how it can be conserved and protected. From preserving the area of the tiger reserve from encroachment and from deforestation to protecting the prey base and the ecological balance, all these areas are prioritized under Project Tiger. So for each tiger reserve, a customized plan, a site-specific plan is designed to ensure that the food chain, the prey base and the forested area is adequately protected. So a unique concept is applied in a tiger reserve known as the core buffer model. In tiger reserves, a core area is identified, which is the core habitat of the tigers. And all human activities in the core area is completely prohibited. You see this in national parks as well. Even in national parks, biosphere reserves, the core buffer model of conservation is implemented. In the core habitats, human activities can be completely prohibited, apart from a few exceptions which might be allowed. If there is a human habitation, if there is a forest dwelling community or a tribe which is present in the core area, they can be evicted, they can be relocated outside of the core area on the fringes of the buffer zone. So the core area becomes the focus region of the conservation efforts, and the buffer area acts like a cushion which takes the impact from the outside and protects the core habitat, thus leading to the success of the conservation plan. So under the conservation plan, there is focus on protecting the water sources, tackling forest fires, even dealing with man-animal conflict, because tiger population could result in man-animal conflict incidents where tigers might venture, especially the old tigers which are no longer able to hunt the prey on their own. They might venture into human habitations or tribal settlements because they might have availability of maybe dogs or cows or chickens or sheep, or sometimes they even attack humans. You might have heard about man-eating tigers. So this results in significant losses for the local communities, and sometimes the local communities might show their anger on the animal itself. So addressing man-animal conflict, compensating the local communities which might be affected, compensating those communities which are being relocated from the core area, and ensuring that they are resettled and rehabilitated. This is a focus of the tiger conservation plan in a tiger reserve. So that is why this model is a very holistic, comprehensive model. The core buffer model has worked very well for India. And in these tiger reserves, even the corridors, the connecting and migrating corridors are identified, and even they are brought under protection. Because as you know, tigers often tend to migrate and move over large distances from one protected area to another. So these migratory corridors are also protected, and the NTCA with the State Forest Department will identify the source habitat and the sink habitat. Source habitat is that part of the tiger reserve where the tiger population is increasing. Sink habitat is that part of the tiger reserve where the tiger population is declining. The idea is to balance the tiger population between the source and the sink. The idea is to encourage the movement of some tigers from the source where there is a dense population and push them to move towards the sink area where the tiger population has depleted. Because when you have more tigers in a small area, it leads to intense competition for food, essentially. Because as you know, tigers or any big cat is highly territorial. It leads to clashes between the tigers as well. So a well-planned attempt is carried out to ensure that some of the tigers move from the source where the population has increased towards the sink where the population has declined, so that we can create a sustainable tiger population in that particular reserve. Now coming to the funding aspect. When it comes to funding, the central government provides for 60% of the funding for tiger reserves. Remaining 40% is borne by the concerned states. So ratio of funding is 60:40. But for northeastern states and Himalayan states, since they face several challenges and difficulties, the center provides for 90% funding and the states provide only 10%. So for these states in Northeast India and in the Himalayan belt, the funding ratio is 90:10. So through such well-planned efforts, look at how tiger population has increased significantly in the country over the last 2 decades. You can see a doubling of tiger population within hardly 14 to 15 years. And as per the latest All India Tiger Census, which is conducted once in every 4 years, currently the tiger population stands at 3,682 tigers. But the concern is 30% of these tigers are residing outside of these tiger reserves, which means we need to focus on the other areas as well, which may not have the same degree of protection. So that is why efforts are made by the state governments, by the NTCA to recognize new habitats and corridors and designate them as well as tiger reserves. So Madhav National Park in Madhya Pradesh is one such habitat. The Madhav National Park, which is well spread out in the northern parts of Madhya Pradesh bordering Rajasthan, it did not have any native tiger population until recently. A few years ago, a few tigers were relocated from the other densely populated tiger reserves such as Pench, Kuno and others. 2 to 3 tigers were introduced and gradually the numbers have multiplied and a viable tiger population became sustainable in the Madhav National Park. And since Madhav National Park is strategically located because it connects with the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan and the Kuno National Park and Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh. So given its location and its importance as a connecting corridor, even the Madhav National Park has now been elevated and designated as a tiger reserve. So that is the importance of this new development. So if you can understand the role of tiger reserves, the journey of India's tiger conservation efforts, and where do we stand today, what efforts has India put in, and what steps are needed to manage and conserve the tigers in the tiger reserves. If you have this basic understanding, you will be able to answer any given question. So please take up this mains practice question, write a detailed note on tiger conservation efforts in India. Now let's move on to the next article. On page number 12, we have another important article related to the International Criminal Court or the ICC, which is regularly in the news. Over the last 2 years, if you have been attending our sessions, we have discussed ICC many times because in recent months, ICC has issued arrest warrants against global leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the Ukraine war, as well as against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister and few Hamas terrorists for being responsible for the atrocities in Gaza and in Israel. Along with that, there has been a new development. The former president of Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has been transported and handed over by the Philippines government to the ICC, as an arrest warrant had been issued against him as well. So right now, the former Philippines president, Rodrigo Duterte, has been sent to The Hague in Netherlands, where the ICC is headquartered, to face the punishment as per the prosecution which is going to be carried out at the International Criminal Court. So first, let me set the context why the former president of Philippines has been accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. See, Philippines, as we have studied in recent sessions, also suffers from several security problems. It faces a local Islamist insurgency in some parts of the country. Plus, there are many mafias and criminal cartels which engage in drugs and arms trafficking in Philippines. This has been a persistent problem in the country. So when Rodrigo Duterte was the president during the last decade, he abused the security forces and the authority he had to use massive force in order to tackle drugs and the trafficking menace. And in the process, many civilians were harmed, including civilians being killed and wiped out. And large-scale human rights violations were alleged against the then president, Rodrigo Duterte. According to reports, more than 30,000 people in Philippines have been killed as a result of the conflict, which was escalated by the government under the leadership of the then president. So based on these accusations, the ICC prosecutor had taken up this case, and accordingly arrest warrant had been issued. So as per the obligations, Philippines, the current government of Philippines under President Ferdinand Richard Jr., they have arrested the former president and transported him, basically extradited him to the Netherlands to hand him over to the custody of the ICC so that he can face punishment as per the trial which will be conducted at the ICC. Now, what is ICC? What is its role, jurisdiction, and how come a former Philippines president has been arrested, but how come Putin or Netanyahu, they haven't been arrested despite an arrest warrant being present against them? That also highlights the limitations of the ICC. So let's understand this quickly. See, in 1998, the Rome Statute was adopted. The Rome Statute primarily dealt with international crimes. 4 types of crimes were designated: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. I'll repeat this point. The Rome Statute recognizes 4 types of international crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, crime of aggression. If these crimes are committed by government leaders, officials, they can be prosecuted by the court which was set up through the Rome Statute. The International Criminal Court was established in the year 2002 after the Rome Statute came into force. So many countries have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, but there are many important countries which have never signed the Rome Statute. There are few which had signed but they never ratified, they even withdrew from the Rome Statute. Now look at the map that I have shared here. If you look at India, China, for example, India, China and many other countries, they have never signed the Rome Statute. We had our own reasons. We believed such provisions could be misused and there could be foreign interference in our internal matters. Given that India faces many internal conflicts from Northeast India to the Naxal conflict and the Kashmir insurgency and terrorism, India was very cautious. So we decided never to sign the Rome Statute. Other big powers like US, Russia, for example, initially they were signatories to Rome Statute, but later they withdrew after they realized that this could be possibly misused for foreign interference in their internal matters. So most of the major powers have stayed out of it. But most European countries, Latin American countries, they're all committed to the Rome Statute to uphold human rights. Now, what is the jurisdiction of this court? See, the ICC can actually take up cases only when these crimes occur in state parties. that is countries which have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, right? Either the state itself can bring the complaint, or if the state itself has carried out these crimes, then ICC can on its own take up the investigation and even take up prosecution and issue arrest warrants against those leaders, those officials who are responsible for these crimes. So apart from this, even the UN Security Council can refer cases. Let's say such crimes have occurred in a non-state party. Let's say a country is not party to Rome Statute, like Israel, for example. Israel is, of course, not a party to it. But let's say Israel allegedly has committed these crimes in a territory such as Palestine, because Palestine is a signatory, by the way. So then UNSC can refer the case, or the other state parties can bring up the case or push the ICC prosecutor, or the ICC prosecutor on their own can take up these cases and accordingly, based on their preliminary investigation, issue arrest warrants. And the state parties will have an obligation to arrest these individuals. Those who are parties to the Rome Statute have a legal obligation to arrest those individuals who are accused of these crimes. Now, if you look at Philippines, for example, Philippines was a signatory. Until 2019, it was a signatory. So when these calls came up that President Rodrigo Duterte should be prosecuted by ICC, this started from 2018 itself. Then he was still the president of Philippines. So fearing a possible prosecution from ICC and possible foreign interference, the then president, Rodrigo Duterte, he withdrew Philippines from the Rome Statute. And thus Philippines has claimed that ICC has no jurisdiction over Philippines and these cases concerning the allegations in Philippines. But however, ICC prosecutor has argued that when these crimes occurred, especially since 2011 to 2018, Philippines was still a state party to the Rome Statute, and thus ICC has jurisdiction over Philippines and it can issue a warrant and get the Philippines president arrested. But of course, it requires the cooperation of that concerned government. Now, this is where I think you can realize that ICC has a major shortcoming and limitation. See, ICC has no enforcement authority of its own. It doesn't have a police force of its own or an enforcement branch. It can simply issue the arrest warrant and it has to rely on the state parties to carry out the arrests. So that is the reason why these arrest warrants have little meaning. Now, if you take a country like Russia, Israel, which are not state parties, they are not obliged to follow ICC arrest warrants. And if the leaders do not travel to those countries which are state parties, they will not face any arrest. And also, if the leaders are from major powerful countries who have influence, they can easily get away with these crimes, even if there is an arrest warrant pending against them, because no country is going to challenge major powers like Russia or Israel. But when it comes to smaller countries, weaker countries, for example, war-torn countries in Africa, or a country like Philippines for that matter, their leaders and officials who might have committed these horrific crimes, they get arrested, they even face punishment. Whereas leaders of powerful countries, though they have arrest warrants against them, will never face any kind of arrest or prosecution. So that shows the politics related to ICC and its arrest warrants. Now in Philippines as well, the current government initially was not willing to arrest the former president after ICC issued the warrant, because the current government was in coalition with the other party, which is headed by Rodrigo Duterte. But after Rodrigo Duterte's party withdrew from that coalition, the government basically has played domestic politics. The current president has gotten rid of his opponent by extraditing the former president to face prosecution at the ICC. So you can see how domestic politics can play a role. Since state parties have the obligation and the duty under Rome Statute, let's say a leader of a former government has been accused of these crimes and a warrant has been issued. Tomorrow there is a different government under a different leadership. So domestically, if these leaders and parties are rivals of each other, they can settle scores basically by extraditing the former leader and by making them face punishment at the hands of the ICC. So domestic politics and global politics is what determines whether these accused will get arrested or not. So that shows the limitations, the shortcomings, the ineffectiveness of ICC. So with this, we end the discussion on this article. So please take up this practice question. Try to write answers, because answer writing is what will help improve your writing skills. Try to post your answers in the comment section so it can help other students as well. Now let's look at another interesting article from page number 1 on the front page. The Hindu carries an update. The Election Commission of India has held a very important meeting with the Home Secretary, the Legislative Secretary and the CEO of the UIDAI, Unique Identification Authority of India. The Chief Election Commissioner, who was recently appointed, called for this meeting with senior officials to discuss the possibility of linking the EPIC, or essentially the electoral photo identity card, what we call as the voter card, with the Aadhaar of the voters. This idea is being reconsidered by the Election Commission because linking of the voter card and the EPIC number with Aadhaar was taken up few years ago in 2015. But following a judicial intervention, Election Commission had stopped this exercise. But now Election Commission is proposing to revive this plan and link voter ID cards with Aadhaar. So what is the context? Why is Election Commission considering this? See, recently there have been strong accusations with regard to electoral malpractices in the country. During the recent general elections to the Lok Sabha and during recent assembly elections, especially the Maharashtra assembly election, a lot of allegations have come up. Opposition parties have alleged that in some states there is a sudden jump in the number of voters in a particular constituency or in a certain state, which is unexplained. So there is a fear that fake names are being added and electoral rolls are being manipulated. The Trinamool Congress in West Bengal has alleged that voters in different states, have the same EPIC number. If you check your voter ID card, there is a unique number added on it, the EPIC number. There are voter cards in the country issued to different voters in different states with the same EPIC number. So Trinamool Congress raised a question, how is this possible? How can voters in different states have the same EPIC number? Is this a manipulation or a fraud which has been committed? Will it lead to fraudulent voting? Such questions were raised by opposition parties. So Election Commission replied to these allegations. The Election Commission said the sudden increase which is seen in certain states and constituencies in the enrollment in the voters list is quite natural. It has happened in the past as well. And there are reasons which explains the sudden jump, increased enrollment or the rise in population or increase in the number of people domiciled in the constituency. Number of factors will contribute to it, and we have seen such trends in the past as well. But such clarifications are not enough because Election Commission will have to establish the integrity of the elections, ensure that the people believe that elections are free and fair and it should be held in a free and fair manner. And Election Commission has said that the same EPIC number which has been noted, which is an established fact as well, where different voters from different states have the same EPIC number, Election Commission has explained why this has happened. It's not with a malintention. It's not that there was an attempt made to manipulate the elections. This is a pure manual error, a clerical level error which has happened because see, now Election Commission of India has an online platform called AeroNet, which is used to enter the voter details and ensure that all the details are uniquely stored and preserved. But before AeroNet digital platform was introduced for voter enrollment, most entries were done manually. So as a result of manual errors which were made in the entry and the enrollment of voters, such cases have come up where many different voters in different states end up having the same EPIC number. This no longer happens with AeroNet digital platform, but some of the previous registrations which have been taken up by the electoral authorities, it has led to such manual typographical errors where different voters from different states end up having the same EPIC number. But of course, even this has to be corrected. This has to be prevented. And it's very important to establish the identity of the voter to ensure that the right voter is casting the vote. There should not be someone else casting a proxy in someone else's name. There shouldn't be someone who's creating fraudulent voter ID cards and trying to manipulate the elections. So to prevent this, one idea is to link voter ID cards with Aadhaar. Since Aadhaar is a unique identification number, seeding Aadhaar with the voter ID card and the EPIC number could help in filtering out duplication it could help in filtering out bogus voters from the list. Election Commission had taken up one such exercise few years ago in 2015. It launched a very ambitious program called NERPAP, NERPAP. This was an attempt by the Election Commission to purify the electoral roll and authenticate all the voters, to remove any duplications and fake and bogus voters from the list. So this exercise, the National Electoral Rolls Purification and Authentication Program, or NERPAP, NERPAP, this exercise was carried out in many constituencies, and several voters, they were basically linked with their Aadhaar to ensure the sanctity of the electoral rolls. But however, the Supreme Court later intervened. Since the Aadhaar case regarding privacy and fundamental rights was being heard, an interim order was passed with the Supreme Court stating that the Aadhaar should be used on a voluntary basis only for welfare schemes, for linking PAN cards and welfare programs, and it can't be made mandatory. So since Supreme Court passed this interim order stating that Aadhaar cannot be made mandatory because it might lead to exclusion of a number of eligible beneficiaries with regard to government schemes, it could even constitute a breach of one's data privacy as well if it can be misused by government authorities. So the Supreme Court passed this order at that point stating that Aadhaar is voluntary, it should be used only for government welfare schemes and PAN linking. So thus, Election Commission had to stop this exercise. So now the idea is being reconsidered. See, under Section 23 of RPA, Representation of People Act, it is very clearly specified that electoral authorities, they can ask the voter to show their Aadhaar card to prove their domicile and their identity, but on a voluntary basis. They can't make it mandatory. Even the government has clarified that if at all we use this method to link voter ID with Aadhaar to remove the duplicated names and numbers and to basically purify the electoral rolls, the government has promised and clarified that it will not be made mandatory. Just because someone has not seeded their voter ID with Aadhaar doesn't mean your name will be struck off from the electoral roll. That will not happen. Because this could hit the very foundation of your right to vote. So the government has clarified, Election Commission also has clarified that we might consider this idea to link voter ID with Aadhaar on a voluntary basis so that we can avoid such duplication, such manual errors can be eliminated and we can ensure the purity of the electoral rolls. But it will not be made mandatory if a voter has not linked their Aadhaar, if they have not seeded their Aadhaar with their voter ID card, their names will not be struck off from the roll. Their names will still remain, they will still have the right to vote. So this idea is being considered by the Election Commission, and that is why the Chief Election Commissioner has met with these top officials. Next, a very important article related to India's security, related to India-Myanmar relations. So this article talks about the border security challenges present along the India-Myanmar border and the decision of the Government of India, the Ministry of Home Affairs, to fence the entire India-Myanmar border. So let's understand this topic in slight detail. See, India shares a very long international border with Myanmar. It stretches to 1,643 kilometers. It is shared by multiple northeastern states, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram, in that order in a north-south direction. Arunachal Pradesh has a 520-kilometer border. Nagaland has a 215 kilometer border, Manipur 398 kilometers and Mizoram 510 kilometer border. So please remember these basic facts because there can be a geography based question, map based question asked on this particular topic. See, this border has been a big challenge for India since many decades. The India-Myanmar border is highly porous. There are many natural gaps in the border. It is densely forested. There are hilly mountainous regions, very remote areas which are not connected with roads. So this makes border security, border management very challenging. The complex terrain and geography of this region, there are many rivers cutting across the border as well, which makes border security, border management extremely challenging and difficult. The border guarding force is the Assam Rifles. Under the One Border, One Force policy of Ministry of Home Affairs, India has designated Assam Rifles as the nodal border guarding force for the India-Myanmar border. Now, what complicates the border security, border management over here is the demography, the unique demography of Northeast India and Myanmar. In this region, there are many ethnic tribes, indigenous communities, which share relations across the border. For example, we have Nagas in India connected with the subgroups of Nagas in Myanmar. We have the Mizos in Mizoram sharing familial ties and direct cultural ties with the Chin community on the other side of the border in Myanmar. They are even linked with the Kuki-Zo community. The Kukis in Manipur are linked to the Zo-Zomi community on the other side of the border in Myanmar. Many of these indigenous tribes and ethnic communities are connected, and when the British drew this boundary during the colonial period, it ended up dividing many of these tribes and ethnic communities. It hurt their economic and cultural interests. So many of the communities don't respect the border as well. They freely move around, and it's a necessity for them. It's a necessity for their survival, their livelihood, and for their cultural ties. So keeping this in mind, India-Myanmar started a free movement regime that goes back to 1960s. From 1960s onwards, India-Myanmar implemented a free movement regime to enable the villagers in the border areas to freely move around without a visa or a passport. Over the years, we have reduced the jurisdiction of the free movement regime. In 2016, under the latest free movement regime, the application was restricted and limited to 16 kilometers from the international border on both the sides. So those villages which are present on both sides of the border within 16 kilometers from the boundary, those who are domiciled in these villages, right, they will have a right to freely move across the border to meet their relatives and family members, to engage in cross-border trade, which will help in protecting their economic and cultural interests. A visa-free, passport-free transit mechanism was created where these villagers who are domiciled within 16 kilometers of the border, they are issued a border pass, and using the border pass, they can freely transit between both the sides. But however, it has been alleged that the free movement regime has enabled easy infiltration into India. Because see, Myanmar has gone through long periods of crisis. Since 1960s, Myanmar has gone through a major political crisis where the military, the Tatmadaw, has toppled the civilian government. It has never allowed democracy to flourish and enforced authoritarian military rule. There are many organized criminal gangs which operate. Myanmar has been a hub of organized crime, from drug trafficking to arms and human trafficking to wildlife trafficking, and now even cyber scams. It's part of the Golden Triangle region with Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. So these criminal actors have often infiltrated into India, smuggling drugs, weapons, and thus creating a security problem in Northeast India. The Northeast insurgents, from the Bodo insurgents to Ulfa, to Naga insurgents to the Mizo and other insurgents, they've often crossed over the border to escape Indian security forces, and they have established safe havens across the border in Myanmar. So our security problems in the Northeast, be it Northeast insurgency, be it the organized crime, especially drug and arms trafficking and human and wildlife trafficking, they've flourished in Northeast India primarily because of the porous nature of this border. Now, the recent crisis in Manipur, the ethnic violence between the Meiteis and the Kuki-Zo community, has also been related and linked with the border-related problems. The state government of Manipur, under former Chief Minister Biren Singh, had alleged that the free movement regime was especially responsible for the large entry of illegal migrants and the Zo-Zomi refugees. So, when the state government started targeting the Zo-Zomi migrants and refugees, it basically pitted the Kuki community against the state, leading to eventual violence and clashes between the Kukis and the Meiteis over the question of the scheduled tribe status. So the problems in Manipur has been linked with the problems in neighboring country Myanmar, especially since Myanmar went back into military rule since 2021 and it descended again into a civil war, right? Because right now the military in Myanmar is facing a challenge from the pro-democracy forces and the ethnic armed organizations, and this has triggered a refugee crisis into India. Both Mizoram and Manipur have taken in a number of refugees. So the Kukis in Manipur accommodated the Zo-Zomi community who are related to them on humanitarian grounds, which has been resisted by the Meiteis in the valley and by the state government of Manipur. So following all the violence in Manipur, last year the Home Minister declared, Union Home Minister Amit Shah, that we are going to stop the free movement regime and we are going to fence this entire border. But however, free movement regime was not stopped. See, many students have a wrong assumption regarding this because the Home Minister made this announcement saying free movement regime has been stopped, but it never was actually stopped. Since it was strongly opposed by Nagas and Kukis and even by the Mizos, because that will hit their economic rights, their cultural interests will be affected. The Home Ministry has revised the free movement regime. It has not stopped the free movement regime. From 16 kilometers, now its application has been reduced to 10 kilometers. So those border villages present within 10 kilometers of the boundary, those villagers will enjoy the benefit of free movement regime. They'll get a border pass to move around. So free movement regime has been restricted. It has not been abolished. But the fencing has started. The Home Ministry has made dedicated allocation to fence the entire border using an advanced indigenous fence, which is anti-cut and anti-climb. This fence will have these features built into it, which can't be cut easily by the criminals or the infiltrators. They can't climb over it easily. So such an advanced fence is being set up along the entire length and breadth of this 1643 kilometer border. Initially, a small fence was created at More, which is a commercial border town, a trading town in Manipur. And border gates have been installed to regulate the free movement. At designated points, which are designated as border crossing points, only there people can cross over under the free movement regime. They can't randomly cross over anywhere they want. So in the coming 10 years, India hopes to complete the fencing of this complex border. And this project will require around 31,000 crores in investment. Because the government will not only fence this border with an advanced fence, but will also take other measures from installing CCTV cameras to advanced sensors to floodlighting if necessary, along with constructing border roads. Number of border roads will be created so that Assam Rifles, the border guarding force, can access the crossing points and the fenced areas to patrol and secure this sensitive border. This mega project will take more than 10 years to be completed with a total investment of 31,000 crore rupees. And at designated points, border crossing points will be created where gates will be set up along with the required facilities so that people can cross over by making use of the free movement regime. And this will be made accountable. See, previously free movement regime was not really accountable. Once the domiciled villagers within the prescribed boundary, if they had the border pass, they could freely cross over without any checks and balances. So now the government is putting in place a measure. At these border crossing gates, surveillance cameras would be placed so that the images of those who are crossing over is captured, and Assam Rifles will issue a document. So those who want to cross over, they have to fill a form, and all those details are entered online on an online portal by Assam Rifles, and their biometrics are also captured. So when that person goes back to their country, let's say someone from Myanmar has come to India, so they can cross to India only through the designated crossing points at the border gates which are set up, where their images will be captured, their biometric details will be captured. They'll have to fill out a form and all the details are uploaded on the online portal. So this pass will be valid for 7 days, for 1 week. So when they go back to Myanmar, they have to return the pass, which establishes that they have left the country, that they have not overstayed the entry which was granted to them. So such a foolproof mechanism is being put in place, and the fencing and the construction of these roads will eventually help in sealing this border and still facilitating limited cross-border movement to protect the interests of Nagas, Kukis and Mizos, mainly to protect their economic and cultural interests. So that is what we learned from this important article. Now coming to the next topic on page number 9, we have another important interesting article here, which talks about the identification of scheduled tribes in the country. See, scheduled tribes have constitutional status in the country. There's a list which is maintained, which is notified by the President of India. Today in India, we have around 700 plus scheduled tribes which are notified, and they enjoy special privileges under the Constitution. Through the policy of affirmative action, that is the policy of reservation, scheduled tribes, given the historical disadvantages they have faced, the historical oppression, exclusion they have faced, in a caste hierarchical society like India. Scheduled tribes have been uplifted socially through the policy of affirmative action by giving them with reservation in schools, in colleges, in education, in jobs, by giving them a special focus in government schemes and welfare programs. We have dedicated ministries and departments looking after tribal welfare, dedicated constitutional provisions under 5th and 6th schedule for tribal areas of India. Now the point is, how are we recognizing and identifying scheduled tribes? On what basis? There are 756 scheduled tribes in the country as of now, and since the last census, since the 2011 census, 27 new scheduled tribes have been added. But did you know there are hundreds of other communities which are also demanding scheduled tribe status? Because obviously even that community would like to enjoy the benefits of reservation. They would like to enjoy the privileges which are accorded to scheduled tribes in the country. So hundreds of communities are demanding the status as well. But how do you determine which community is a scheduled tribe? This is a very important issue. Right now, the government has used certain parameters that were laid down by the Lokur Committee back in 1965. The Lokur Committee identified few parameters such as primitive traits. If a community has primitive traits, or if a community is geographically isolated, if a certain forest dwelling community or indigenous community, if they are located in a remote area which is inaccessible, that was seen as a criteria. Then if a community is inherently shy when it comes to having contact with the outside world and the mainstream, because generally tribal communities and ethnic indigenous groups, they don't like contact with outside groups. This is quite inherent to tribal communities around the world. They are very secretive, guarded and protective of their land, their rights, their language and their culture. So this is something that's natural to a tribal community because they face a lot of vulnerabilities. Tribal communities are very small in size. They feel threatened from any outside contact and outside competition. They feel outsiders might take away their land and resources and destroy their culture and their population eventually. So these are very legitimate concerns. So a community which is shy to establish contact with the mainstream, a community which is backward. So these are certain parameters that were laid down by the Lokur Committee based on which 756 scheduled tribes have been recognized. But experts, especially anthropologists, they are of the opinion that this criteria laid down by Lokur Committee is meaningless, it is outdated and even condescending for these communities. Maybe these criteria were valid back in 1965, but not today. Because there are many better methods of identifying a scheduled tribe. Because see, these parameters, they are not tangible, they are not quantifiable, you can't quantify them. How do you define a group is primitive or not? How do you identify geographical isolation? Yes, you can take a rough guess, but that alone is not enough. It's not a scientific way of determining which community is a scheduled tribe or not. So recently, the top anthropologists in the country and experts working in the field of tribal welfare and important authorities, they all got together at the Indian Anthropology Congress, which is organized by the Anthropological Survey of India. Even the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, which is a constitutional body, took part in the Indian Anthropology Congress to come out with ideas regarding how we can identify tribal communities. So all the top experts, the anthropologists and experts in tribal welfare, they were all of the opinion that the parameters laid down by Lokur Committee is outdated. We need new indicators and parameters, which is more scientific, through which the right community can be identified. Those who deserve the designation can be provided. See, right now this is a burning issue in Manipur. Manipur violence is entirely related to the same issue of recognizing a community as a scheduled tribe. While Nagas and Kukis were recognized as scheduled hill tribes, the Metis were not given the status since they were in majority, since they don't meet these criteria laid down by Lokur Committee. But recently, the order of the High Court, which ordered that the state government should consider providing ST status, is what triggered the large-scale violence between the Kukis and Metis. So it's important to establish a clear criteria because this is a hot political issue as well, which can result in social tensions. So what experts are suggesting is that we need to move beyond the traditional perception of a tribe. We can't use such vague parameters which are not tangible, which are not quantifiable. Instead, we have to create a scale, like a spectrum, where you can grade a community by assigning certain weightage for different indicators, and accordingly you can place a community on the scale regarding their tribalness. Some communities might be more tribal, more backward, more remote and shy than other communities. You can't club all of them together. So there is a need to distinguish between them, identify them on a scale, on a spectrum, and this scale has to be designed by anthropologists, experts, policymakers. Once you have such an index, and if you prepare an ethnographic report on the basis of such a scale, you will better understand which communities are really tribal and backward, and accordingly government policies can be focused upon them. So what these experts have suggested is that maybe we can consider tangible parameters. They have proposed around 150 indicators to be used to create this scale or spectrum. It could include the cultural practices and the cultural indicators of a particular community, status of the language spoken by that community, or the customs or practices, the kinship and the marriage related customs and practices, inheritance related practices of a community. So all these factors can be specifically quantified. Anthropologists can come out with a method which is more scientific, which is more practical, which is more tangible and quantifiable. So using this index, if each indicator has a certain weight, then you can decide the extent of tribalness of a community. So that is the idea which has been discussed at the India Anthropology Congress. So this is another important topic. Now let's move towards the prelims section. We have few small articles. Let's discuss them quickly and then we'll wrap up today's session. On page 7, we have this article related to India-France relations, especially the defense relations between India and France. France has been a key weapon supplier to India. I'm sure all of you are aware of this. In recent years, France has been one of the top suppliers. Russia remains the #1 defense supplier to India, followed by Israel, France and US, which shared the number 2, 3, 4 spots. France has supplied India with the Rafale fighter jets through a government-to-government deal for the Indian Air Force. Just few years ago, the Modi government signed a government-to-government contract to procure around 36 Rafale fighter jets for the Indian Air Force to address the depleting squadron strength of the Indian Air Force. We also procured the Scorpene diesel-electric submarines under Project 75 for the Indian Navy, under which France transferred the technology as well to India, and these 6 Scorpene submarines were indigenously built by Mazgaon Dock Limited. And all the 6 submarines have now been inducted into the Indian Navy. Now, can you identify under which class these submarines have been inducted? There is a certain class of submarines that the Navy has designated. These are the latest conventional submarines that have been inducted into the Indian Navy. They were all built in India, indigenously built here, based on the technology and the design provided by France. So now the armed forces are looking for an extension of some of these deals and procurement of few more advanced platforms, which is crucial for the Indian Armed Forces. The Navy wants 3 more additional Scorpene diesel-electric submarines. 6 have already been inducted. So please identify which class of submarines are those, and please mention the class in the comment section. So now the Navy has expressed interest for 3 more Scorpene diesel-electric submarines, and the Navy also has expressed interest in the naval variant, the aircraft carrier variant of the Rafale M, Rafale Marine variant. Indian Navy operates aircraft carriers such as INS Vikramaditya, which we procured from Russia. Then INS Vikrant, which has been indigenously built and commissioned recently. So we are looking for advanced fighter jets to operate from our aircraft carriers. Right now we have the MiG-29 case, but very soon they will be decommissioned. So we want replacements. So India has already frozen these 2 defense hardware from France. 3 additional Scorpene submarines and 26 Rafale Marine fighter variants for aircraft carriers. It has been approved by the Defense Acquisition Council as well, which is chaired by the Defense Minister. Now it is awaiting final approval from the highest authority in the field of security, which is the Cabinet Committee on Security. It's awaiting the final nod from the Cabinet Committee on Security, and once it is done, India might go ahead and sign a direct government-to-government deal with France. Is that clear? Now, please find out the composition of Cabinet Committee on Security as well. I told you that it's the highest authority with regard to security matters in the country, so you should know the composition. I'll give you one clue. It is chaired by the Prime Minister of India. So the chairperson of Cabinet Committee on Security is the PM. So can you identify who are the other members of this important committee? Mention that in the comment section. Next, we have a couple of interesting articles from Science and Tech. Let's take a quick look. According to a recent study, increase in greenhouse gas emissions can actually threaten our satellites in the coming decades. Some of you might be wondering, how is it possible? How can greenhouse gas emissions threaten satellites in orbit? So this is a very interesting study. According to this scientific study, which has been published in a reputed publication, researchers have found out that increasing concentration of greenhouse gases has an impact on the atmosphere, the atmospheric layers, and the density of the atmosphere itself. This could lead to changes in the mesosphere and thermosphere, and it could lead to a cooling and contraction effect in the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere, which can reduce the orbital space that is available. And this could risk the deorbiting phenomena, where space debris is often deorbited. And this could lead to crowding out of the orbital space in low Earth orbit. And as a result, future deployment of satellites will become very difficult, challenging, and almost impossible. So this simulation which was carried out has shown that if greenhouse gas concentration were to increase significantly by the end of this century, then the satellite capacity in low Earth orbit will decline by 50 to 66%. There will be a decline of 50 to 66% by the end of the century when it comes to deploying satellites in low Earth orbit because of the changes that might happen in the upper atmosphere, the cooling and contraction effect, which will reduce the orbital space, creating more space debris, concentrating more space debris in a smaller space, which will make it unviable to deploy more satellites in the orbit. So that is why climate change is a massive threat. It could threaten the deployment of satellites as well. So it's a possibility. So please be aware of this. Next, there is another Science and Tech article that refers to a very dangerous infectious disease known as Melioidosis. So let's understand what is this disease and what the article is talking about. Melioidosis is an infectious bacterial disease. It's caused by a gram-negative bacterium known as Burkholderia pseudomallei. It is primarily found in soil, water which has been contaminated, and when humans come in contact with contaminated soil and water, when they ingest or inhale or when they touch such contaminated soil and water, that is when they will contract the bacterial infection. Many people who contract the bacteria, they will not even show any symptoms. But for those who suffer symptoms, they might start suffering from fever and other flu-like symptoms initially, but this can escalate very quickly. It can turn into severe pneumonia, leading to respiratory problems. Abscesses might develop, especially in the respiratory tract, leading to a septic shock as fluid and water retention increases in the air tracts and in the lungs, causing a septic shock which could turn fatal as well. See, this disease has been primarily found in parts of Southeast Asia and Australia. In Northern Australia, for example, in Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand, Northeast Thailand in particular, but it is also found in India, especially in states like Odisha. Right now, India shares 44% of the disease burden in the world. 44% of these cases being reported globally are occurring in India, which shows that India is very vulnerable and prone. And a study has established that environmental factors, the seasonal weather changes, the climatic changes, they have a direct impact and direct correlation with the spread of this deadly disease. Especially in the monsoon season, during peak monsoon, when there is high levels of humidity present, the right conditions will exist in tropical countries like India, Thailand, etc. for the easy spread of this deadly bacteria. So that's why those who work with soil and water, especially in these areas where the outbreaks are reported, there people have to take a lot of precautions. They have to wear gloves. They have to avoid contaminated stagnant water. Authorities also will have to take steps to use, let's say, chlorination to purify some of the water bodies and encourage awareness amongst the people. Especially there are few pockets where the outbreaks are frequently reported. So in those specific areas where the vulnerability is high, these precautionary measures can be taken. Because see, there is no vaccine. There is no human vaccine available for this disease. Antibiotics could be the line of treatment, but that's primarily symptomatic treatment. Though patients can be cured of the disease if there is early detection, it is better to prevent the disease altogether. So that's why these precautionary measures are very essential. Now coming to the last article for today, on page 12, there's an article that refers to the Raisina Dialogue, which is all set to begin tomorrow at Raisina Hills in Delhi. So what is Raisina Dialogue? This is India's premier diplomatic dialogue, which is organized by a think tank based out of New Delhi known as ORF, Observer Research Foundation. A Delhi-based think tank, ORF, it's a private think tank which also gets some funding from Ministry of External Affairs. And it is organized in collaboration with Ministry of External Affairs. The MEA, in collaboration with ORF, organized this premier conclave known as Raisina Dialogue. This conference brings together some of the top global leaders, head of states, head of governments, former leaders, presidents and prime ministers and ministers of other countries, as well as top officials, diplomats and intelligence officers, military officials, strategic experts, academicians, journalists, even researchers and students from around the world will assemble in New Delhi for this premier flagship event which is organized by India. It is planned and organized on the lines of other global events such as the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and the Munich Security Conference, which was recently held in Germany. So on the lines of these global conclaves, similarly, India organizes Raisina Dialogue. It's named after Raisina Hills, where India's government is seated. That's where Rashtrapati Bhavan is situated, and you have the north and south block on the Raisina Hill. So it's a reference to the seat of power in the national capital, and it's organized jointly by MEA and ORF. So the 10th edition is all set to begin. It was started in 2016. Since then, it is held every year at the start of the year, usually between January to March, and a lot of global dignitaries are invited. So tomorrow, Raisina Dialogue will kick off. They will have deliberations, discussions on pressing issues from Gaza to Ukraine to Trump's controversial policies. Everything will be discussed, and there will be a number of related articles. We will cover them as well in our analysis and in our videos. So keep track of the events taking place at Raisina Dialogue, because the top leaders and officials who will assemble, they will bring some unique insights on pressing geopolitical issues of today. So that is what you need to know with regard to today's newspaper. And on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. Again, I apologize for the delayed start. It was unavoidable due to these unfortunate technical issues. And again, I couldn't write anything because the pen is unfortunately not working today. But I still hope the discussion and explanation made up for it, because at any cost, we didn't want to cancel the session, right? At any cost, the learning should not stop. So we will get this resolved very soon. And by tomorrow, I think it should be fine. So let me know what you think, how the session was in the comments. If you liked it, do hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.